best of all possible worlds. And our three speakers this evening we will be starting with HN Nguyen, who is studying economics, and he'll be taking a look at the economics of happiness, a very tricky fish to quantify. Then we'll be hearing from Katie Menendez, who will be looking at monasteries as sort of worlds within worlds during the time period that they were active. And thirdly, we'll be hearing from Jimmy Ba, who is well, from my conversations with him, is a bit of a utopian technology guru, and we'll be hearing his views on perhaps where we're headed. Come on in. And I think on that note, we'll get started with Hia.
Thank you, fellows, welcome, and thank you for being here. Before I begin, just a big thanks to Travels for organizing this, also for his encouragement and support for my topic. Economics of happiness. Why economics? Why happiness? That's my second point. I think happiness as a human goal to pursue is a belief that has been around for quite a while, right? And it's featured prominently in discourse in various academic disciplines, but also in the popular rhetoric. But almost equally ancient is the idea that economics, or the science of wealth management, has something to do with it as well, has something to contribute to realizing that goal of happiness. So I will start off with, for example, Aristotle in the Nicomachean Ethics, he related the subject of money making or economic as an intermediate end toward achieving the final end, which is human happiness. Similarly, Adam Smith, widely quoted and often misrepresented, so-called modern fathers of modern economics, you can see from the quote, he's clearly troubled by the topic of wealth and money making as how it's related to happiness as well. So I think this is going to show that the topic, the concept of happiness within the discipline of economics has been there since the very beginning, which makes it even more somewhat alarming and surprising that modern economy has so little thing to say about happiness. We almost let it out exclusively. And I think part of the reason is because modern happiness, modern economy set up with these weird models of human behavior, almost like a split persona. Nobody really behaves this way, but we just assume that the Homo economicus is what we study instead of the earthly Homo sapien. In defense of that approach, though, I think the answer of why we're treating it this way has a lot to do with what Amartya Sen has called as an engineering approach to economics. And we see it as an instrumental science. We don't care so much about the end, what is it, whether it's happiness or not, whether it's mortality or immortality. We care about what is an appropriate means to get there. And that's we just focus on. And part of it is just because we use mathematical model and the success of using them in showing and showing some insight into a lot of systematic human behavior and social interaction, it leads to the dominance of this approach within the economic methodology. So to the topic of happiness then, so the reason we let it out is because it's pretty difficult to quantify, to measure it. After Benjamin Bentham's felicity calculus, which everybody agrees is a disaster, if you read it, I bet you cannot even try to measure it the way he thought we would be able to. And then so since his time, we almost take it for granted that, we don't touch it because we don't know how to measure it, just leave it be. A new dawn came in around the middle of the last century, around 1950s, 1960s, and actually coming from psychology and sociology, they come up with new tool to somewhat measure or quantify happiness in a large scale using what they call a subjective well-being survey. And let me do a little demonstration to show you how this actually works. So, if I ask you right now, taking all things together, would you say you are not at all happy, not very happy, rather happy or very happy? So just 1 to 4, right? You can just pick a number from 1 to 4. How many of you here have a number in your mind? Just show your hand. Just raise your hand. There we go, right? Okay, again, a little bit more sophisticated, right? How satisfied you are with your life at the whole this day. You have a scale of 1 to 10. with 10 is absolutely amazing. I'm so satisfied with my life. I don't want anything else. I don't need anything. And 1 is I'm miserable. I just want to kill myself. So from that scale, how many of you here have a number in your mind that describe how satisfied you are with your life? Just raise your hand. Exactly. So, it's actually that simple, right? We ask and then people answer. Now, before I go on and show you the result of some of the survey that they have, I want to address some of the question probably up in your mind. The first problem is obviously, how do we know if people are lying, right? We don't. But research from psychology is showing that there is surprisingly low level of noise, which means that people mean it when they tell you how happy they are. They actually mean it. They don't purposefully try to lie to you. With the caveat, bear in mind that in some culture, being unhappy is actually carried with its social stigma. But then it reminds us that we have to be sensitive when we interpret the data across cultural comparison. It should not be a reason to not doing it. Another problem is probably, distinguishing between, am I level 7 happy, or am I level 8, or is it a 6? Like, how do I know? Again, it just reminds us to be very cautious when we interpret the result, and especially not to predict individual behavior, but look at it from an aggregate scale. And the last concern is, oh, I'm happy just because it is Friday, and I'm just extra happy, right? Which we call as a sort of random mood swing. That's it. Your answer to these kind of questions is polluted by just random impulse, temporary event. There is a numbers of technical way to deal with this, and a very simple way is to ask both of these questions at the same time. So first I ask you how happy you are, and then I provide a more sophisticated way for you to evaluate your life satisfaction. And the idea is that your impulsive, temporary response will be captured by the first question of how happy you are. So when you move on to these questions, it's more about something durable, something characteristic of life that makes it worth living, that makes it worthwhile and satisfactory. Okay, so should turn that. Using that, we have surprisingly large database. And here are some of the international surveys that has been carried out for quite a while. I particularly like the World Value Survey because the one that I used before. It started in 1981. It's still running, 6th wave, and the last wave, 100 countries with 80,000 respondents. This is like a dream. 80,000 people telling you how happy they are. And then we ask not just about how happy they are, we ask, their age, education, employment, their political belief, are they going to church, are they giving to charity, what's their view of democracy. It's incredibly rich set of data, freely accessible online. We just love it. It's just like a new toy store opened in town, and it's for free. People go crazy over it. So, what have we found? The first fact I want to draw to you is, surprisingly, the answer of what we call the micro-determinant happiness is consistent across countries, regardless of their geographical locations or cultures or development level. When you ask what is the economic variables that matter for happiness, here you go. Employment, you are better, you're happier when you have a job. Health, you are better, you're happier when you're in better health. And education, more educated people tend to report higher subjective well-being. Age is it's actually in a U shape. So as we age and we become mature, we get less happy, and you hit the rock bottom with a midlife crisis, right? That's when the family is going crazy. You have mortgage to pay off, and you don't even know what to do in your life. But if you get past that point, your kid's gonna leave home, right? You pay off your mortgage, you become retired, and you see life in a different perspective. You actually get happier, and this is very robust result across culture. It goes in that U shape. Gender, this is a little bit trickier. Generally, there is more survey report that being male has an added advantage of being happier. We're not so sure about that. Social capital, very important in terms of the organization that you're affiliated with, how many friends you have, you get a community organization that you're involved in. All of this increase your level of well-being. And that's the same thing with social mobility. If you perceive that you live in a not necessarily more equitable, but there's a lot of chance that things are going to get better in the future, that you are not condemned to this sort of poor condition for your entire life, that your children or the next future generation also have a lot of better chance to do better than you are, then that also have a positive impact in your happiness. What about income, right? We're just so obsessed about income, economic, we just deal with that all day. And that would be the main focus of the empirical result today for me. So this is the graph I want to focus on. I generate this from the set of from the world value surveys that I showed you earlier. So this line is very unhappy. So the horizontal scale is by income group. So you have from the 0 and then 1 is the lowest income, and then 10 is the top income group in your economy. And then the vertical axis is feeling of happiness. It's decomposed in percentage. For example, you see if you are at the lowest income group, about 10% people say they are very unhappy. About 40-something percent of people say they're happy. About 20% they are split between unhappy and very happy. What I want you to look at how the pattern change as you go from low income to high income. You will see that people who reported they are very unhappy or unhappy decrease as income grow. And you will see that happiness, either happy or very happy, grow as income grow. And especially look at the very happy group. Wow, you are rich, you are so happy. Look at this, the rate of increasing just extraordinary. And this is using data across, I think, 300,000 something observation span of 20 years. So I think it's pretty apparent that happiness and income go positively, right? The richer people tend to report that they are happier on average. But look at this. Here's the second graph. This is I plotted using the World Bank data, and it shows you the economic growth over time from 1960 to 2014. The red line is OECD country, so high income country, extraordinary growth in income. You start up around $10,000 in 1960, and you reach around 30,000 something. It's 3 times increase in your income per capita. And then the blue line is the rest of the world, it's average of the world, and then the green and the purple line is the lower and middle income group. Obviously, that I think since the last few decades or so, we do pretty well in terms of economy, right? Income growth for all group of countries, not just a rich one, although they grow a lot and by the largest margins, but the world as a whole grow richer. But if you think about it in Canada, do you feel like you're supremely happier than your parent generation? I think the obvious answer is no. So what's happening here? This is income decomposition over time. So the vertical axis is still feeling of happiness, but on this horizontal axis, you can imagine it is time. And this is so striking here that unlike the first graph that I showed you, there's virtually no change in percentage of people who reported they are either very happy, happy, unhappy, or very unhappy. Your feeling of happiness across time is stable. Like there is no change at all, despite a change in income. And this is a paradox, right? Because if richer people reported that they're feeling happier, why we see this pattern over time? What is breaking down here? This is called the Easterlin paradox, and then we just bang our head into the wall trying to figure out. There is some hypothesis of explaining it. First one is social comparison. It doesn't matter how much your income is. It doesn't matter. What matters is how much you do relative to people around you. If you earn $20,000 in Canada, that's poverty line in 2015, but 10 times the income per person in Vietnam. So if you're a millionaire living in Bay Street, Toronto, I'm not sure how happy you are. Probably not as happy as a Canadian pensioner with that income but living in a different country like Vietnam. Right? So a dollar is a dollar, but it's not a dollar. When it comes to happiness, it doesn't work on the absolute scale, it works on the relative scale. Social adaptation, you just revise expectation backward, downward, or upward, right? If you're a peasant, you live among all other peasants, you might live a content life. If you're a millionaire who live among the billionaires, you feel pretty grumpy and unhappy about it. And if you think about it, when you evaluate your life in the past, you tend to feel that you are doing better off now because you compare your current income No, you compare your past income with your current expectation. So you feel like you are doing worse off in the past. And then if you look into the future, you expect higher income in the future, but you're using your current expectation. You feel like you will be doing pretty well in the future. That's just a human psychology. So that's sort of the empirical result. What it's telling us is, money, can it buy you happiness? The answer is yes and no, right? It's important, but it's worked in a very relative way. So I will skip it a lot and go straight to the last one, because I'm running out of time. Okay. So what the conclusion I want to draw today is that material wealth should remain an instrument for the higher end of policy. It shouldn't be what direct public policy. Now, if we have a way to measure happiness, can we use it as a goal for public policy instead of focus so incessantly upon economic growth, right? Can we imagine a world in which public happiness is actually what the governments focus on instead of income growth? We need to stop that maddening chase after economic growth, because you know what? Resources are running out sooner or later, right? Economic growth, economic development without growth, it doesn't have to be an oxymoron, especially with the new opening up possibility of bringing back happiness into economies. And I want to leave you with the final quote from Keynes, which I really like. And this is our hope. The best possible world will be the day when the economy concerned about money and wealth and material well-being will take the back seat where it really belongs, and so that we can concentrate our effort and brain power into something that really matters. Thank you.
Just give me a moment while I get this. Yes. Okay. Let's make sure I've got things in the right order here. Perfect. So good evening, everyone. I'll just run back and forth and change the slides. But my talk today is on something a little bit different. I'm sorry I do not have any fancy graphs. Unfortunately, the people I'm not able to talk to 10,000 people. I'm really lucky if I get to talk to 2 people. If 2 people have written something on the same subject is really great for me, considering I work about the year 500 to 700 is sort of my favorite time period. So I'm going to be talking to you tonight about the best of all possible worlds for medieval monks, and I've talked about the ever-changing vision of an everlasting view, which is a slightly reimagining of a Carole King song. Because what really interests me is how monks sort of try and create their best of all possible worlds. So of course everybody's looking for the best of all possible worlds. Well, in the Middle Ages that's a little more complicated, because what the best of all possible worlds was not in fact this world, it was actually the next world, it was heaven. The best of all possible worlds does not exist here on earth. It's really trying to get to heaven to sort of experience God in some sense. Of course that does not mean you just don't do anything in this world. Monks particularly are trying to recreate heaven on earth. And so the monasteries become these very interesting ways of looking at how people think about the best of all possible worlds and try and create it. And one thing monasteries do a lot of, especially in the early Middle Ages, is read the Bible. It's what they do over and over and over again. In fact, the Bible is read aloud in its entirety in 1 year. And people recite the book of Psalms every week. So people are reading the Bible a lot. They know it by heart. And one of the things that this reading the Bible does, or that I think reading the Bible does, is it creates a sort of a sense of timelessness in the minds of the monks. And because the whole idea is God is outside time, God creates the world in time, but God does not exist within time. that in the way monks read the Bible, they sort of create this sense of timelessness, and it helps them sort of connect to this sort of timeless, eternal God in some sense. Now, just to go into a little bit more detail about how monks read the Bible, they're not just, they do read the entire thing, but they don't read it sort of just beginning to end. They will not read, they don't necessarily start at Genesis and end at Revelation. They will read different books at different parts of the year, and they're not just reading it for its literal meaning. There are several senses to the Bible, and just for an example, I've chosen one sort of thing that comes with a sort of a name that comes up a lot, that's been the subject of a lot of biblical commentary over the last 2,000 or so years. That would be Jerusalem. And so if you're a Christian monk, Jerusalem has a lot of different meanings for you. It is, of course, in a historical meaning, it is an actual city. It does exist. You can go there. People do. Monks do go on pilgrimage to Jerusalem from Western Europe. It also has an allegorical meaning, so sort of an earthly figurative meaning. And in that sense, it is the church. And that does not just mean that the word Jerusalem also means the church. It means that in some sense, the city Jerusalem, or the concept of Jerusalem, is actually the Christian church. And then there's an anagogical meaning, which is sort of the mystical meaning. Some people see it as sort of the mystical, what's sort of the heavenly meaning, or something that might have to do with the last times, the end of days. And that means the heavenly city of God, that is sort of mother of everybody. And then you have the tropological meaning, which is the moral meaning. And that would mean Jerusalem is in that sense the soul of man, that God might sometimes punish, might sometimes sort of praise and raise up. So any time a monk reads the word Jerusalem, he is thinking about all these meanings and probably 7 or 8 others at the same time. So it's a very complex reading of the Bible. Now the other important thing is that the historical, so the Hebrew scriptures, what Christians would call the Old Testament, must be understood through the Christian scriptures, the New Testament. You cannot understand anything in the Old Testament without sort of seeing how it prefigures in the New Testament. And everything that happens in the New Testament looks back to things in the Old Testament. So Jesus is acting out the lives of Old Testament prophets. He's doing it explicitly, and people who are reading about it are aware of this and sort of work it into their interpretations. And so when a monk reads about a character in the New Testament, reads about somebody, or reads about a character in the Old Testament, he's not just thinking about that one person. He's thinking about all the other people who whose actions are similar to that one person, who can sort of, it becomes a big, well, here, if you'll just hit the next slide, you'll get an idea.
Just keep waving it.
So instead of time being this wonderful, nice straight line here, a monk who starts at the beginning and goes all the way to the end, you hit the next slide, what you end up with is all these. See, my PowerPoint presentation skills are not that great, so you'll have to bear with me. I had lots of fun trying to create this. But you might have this one event. Let's say this is something that Jesus does. Well, it's making reference to something that happened here in the Bible, and something that happened here in the Bible, and something that happened there in the Bible. And then if you go to the next slide, you'll see that what actually happens is you have this sort of layering of time. Time is not a straight line. Instead, it's this very sort of dense sort of net or web, which I've sort of tried to create here because I couldn't draw a very nice net. But you get this sense of time as being very high vertically, as well as being sort of having horizontal length that also has depth. So this, as I've already said, monks are reading the Bible a lot. It forms very much their sort of the mental picture of the way they see the world. And the whole idea is monks tended to enter the monasteries in my period when they were children. They tended to be given by their parents as children, as oblates. And so they would learn to read by reading the Psalms. They would learn the idea was to memorize the entire Bible and to sort of act out the life, act out the Bible in their lives, basically become the Bible. And so because a monk has read the Bible, has known the books, knows it so well. I don't know if there are any books you know that you've read sort of 1,300 times, maybe there's a favorite children's book that you know really well. You probably could start wherever in that book. The book does not the book no longer becomes a linear concept, it becomes a big web for you. And whatever word you read, you're instantly drawn back to 13 other points in the book. And so you don't see the book as a linear thing anymore. Instead, you see it as this really sort of complex dynamic things. You'll start somewhere and you'll go off on one tangent and that'll bring you to another tangent. And that's sort of how monks read the Bible. And so, as I said, it sort of makes time a net. And so if you go to the next slide, this shows up. So monks are not only reading the Bible a lot, they're also writing lots of things. Everything we have from this period was probably written by a monk or was touched by a monk in one way or another. And so it's a really interesting way of looking at how monks' ideas of the world sort of show up in other things they're writing. So there's this Life of Columbanus, written by this monk, Jonas of Bobbio, and if you'll go to the next slide, you'll figure out, well, who on earth was Columbanus? He was an Irish saint in the 500s, late 500s, early 600s, who started in Ireland but then traveled to the continent, founded a whole bunch of well-known and influential monasteries in France and Italy, and he's credited with introducing Irish spiritual practices onto the continent. He was a very influential monk. But if you go to the next slide, Jonas, who, oh, I didn't, no, it's all right, I must have taken it out, good. So Jonas, who wrote this Life of Columbanus, he wrote it about a generation after Columbanus had died, and he sort of, it's a different life. I find it's really interesting because most saints' lives, they will start with the saint's birth, and they will go all the way to the saint's death, and that will be the end of the life. So you've got the book one here. You've got Columbanus' birth, everything that happens to him, and he dies, with a whole bunch of miracles sort of interspersed to make things interesting. Now, if you go to the next slide, you'll see that this is actually a little bit different. You do have the Life of Columbanus, and then you have this really great book 2, which includes all these different sections about different abbots, different leaders of different monasteries, about different monasteries that Columbanus had founded. So you have, I hesitate to say it's sort of the Bible in reverse, but it is. You have the book one book that's about one character, and then you have book 2, which is about all these different characters who are sort of carrying Columbanus' legacy forward into the future. So it is a linear narrative. You've got Columbanus' life, and then you've got his death. But there's a whole lot. There's Columbanus' life, Columbanus' death. You've got book 2, which is all about things that happen after Columbanus' death. And there are sort of the life of Attal, for example, starts with Attal's birth, it ends with Attal's death. But there's a whole bunch more going on in this book than is just sort of a simple life. And it's actually the way the monks are talking, the way Jonas is writing and talking about this life, shows a lot of the same sort of ideas as the way he's reading the Bible, which also helps to create sort of this timeless sense in the life of Columbanus. So there's all these explicit references to the Bible that show up. Columbanus at one point tells his young disciple to knock on the rock over there because God made water flow from the rock for the people of Israel. So he makes this very explicit connection. What God did once in the Bible, he can still do today. Miracles are not dead. Jesus is the type and justification for the life of all saints, including Columbanus. So Columbanus arrives in France with 12 followers, just like the 12 apostles. He prophesies and he denounces kings like Elijah. So these are explicit references. And in doing so, Columbanus sort of takes on the life of all these biblical figures and brings them forward to the present. So these biblical figures aren't dead, into some sense. What you also have are very interesting references between the two books, just as you would have between the different books of the Bible. My favorite is actually this really great miracle. So Columbanus once is out chopping grain out in a field. A monk cuts his finger off. It's his thumb. Columbanus sort of licks the thumb, sticks it back on, and the thumb is miraculously healed. Now, at the beginning of book 2, there's a monk out in Bobbio in the life of Attal, and he cuts his finger completely off. He's out in the field, he cuts his finger off. He buries it, he runs back to Attal. Attal says, "Why didn't you bring me the finger?" So he has to go back, dig up a finger, go back, and then Attal licks it and sticks it back on, and it's miraculously healed. So you have, again, this explicit connection between the two books. The idea that Columbanus' miracles continue after his death. And you, to some extent, make Columbanus present each time the miracles are recreated. Now, the very structure of this book also helps to sort of disrupt a linear narrative. So each section that I've sort of outlined here in book 2 would stand on its own. You could just read it as its own little life. And although in some of them there is a linear structure within, for example, the life of Latal, if you look down here at the Miracles of Famille, that's a women's monastery, it's a nunnery, and that's actually just made up of a whole bunch of different visions and miracles that nuns tend to have right before they die. And so there's no temporal nature in these Miracles of Famille. And so you get the sense that each of these monasteries, or each of these sections, continues Columbanus's life in some way. Just the way a monk who reads the Bible over and over again sees different things every time he reads it, so if you read all these different sections, you sort of build up a composite picture of what Columbanus's legacy is. That's much more complicated than just a simple linear story. It's not a pick-your-own-adventure story, but it has some of the same aspects. You could follow sort of the miracle aspect of Columbanus, or what's going on at this monastery, or what's going on at that monastery. So it's not a simple linear story. Now, one of the biggest ways that, these are both sort of very, very formal ways that Jonas is trying to create a sense of timelessness and sort of biblical connection, or sort of using sort of some of the ways he studies the Bible in his work. But they're sort of even the way he writes and sort of even the way he talks about, especially the miracles, show a very strong sense of sort of reaching beyond the world and trying to create a sense of timelessness. So in the Bible, miracles themselves are often very strong on place, but not so very strong on time. Time is always relative to something else. It might be in the specific reign of a king, or when such and such was going on, or after such and such. Because what's not in the time when a miracle takes place is not important, because a miracle has purpose not for that specific time, but for all time. A miracle to some extent has to be timeless. And the same thing, of course, goes on in this life of Jonas. He sort of recreates a sort of sacred, miraculous non-time in his works. So if you'll hit the next slide, quotation. If this is sort of the beginning of the Columbanus's finger healing miracle, and we can all pretend we're in grade 3 and try and do the who, what, when, where, why, how of this. You've got the great man. He'd gone reaping with the brothers at a piece of land called Baniratia. Under a south wind, agreeable and favorable, they were cutting the harvest with sickles. You've got all kinds of really interesting information here. You could probably go back to Baniratia and go to the field where this miracle happened if you really wanted to. But when did it happen? Well, one day, sometime. The time when it happened is really not that important. What's far more important is the place and the person who's doing the miracle. If you go to the next one, you'll see that the same thing is happening. So this is this monk named Primaris who gets his finger cut off the second time. He's gone out to grow ground with the plow. He's going to grow wheat. And this is when he's running back and forth trying to bring his thumb to a towel. There's this really wonderful description about the distance between these two places. It's about a mile. He has to climb the steep slope of a mountain, pass across its curved back, and cross a river. You could go and walk that. It makes me want to go and climb this thing, sort of recreate that miracle. And it would have been the same for all of these monks. The life of Columbanus was probably read aloud at dinner in Bobbio about this sort of, and everybody would have known where this was. So you're making a very strong connection to a place. You're making this place holy, but the time is really not important because time is not what's holy. Time is not holy in this sense. It's not the miracle is not important. It's important for what it can teach monks in any time, not for one specific time. So it's only time bound in the sense that people do the actions, people perform the actions, but the God is making the place holy. And the miracles, or the visions that the nuns see in the monastery of Famille is particularly like this. It's all one night, one day, after these events. Those are all you sort of get to introduce the miracles. And so the nuns are almost about to die. They're just about to leave this world. They've made themselves so holy that any sense of time, sort of human time, has lost all meaning. So the miracles have become anchored in the place and the person, not in time. So with all these sort of events, with the sense of kind of creating this timeless miracle, with the idea that these connections between the book, just as you would have between the Old and the New Testament, and with all these connections between the different books, between the different miracles, what you get when you read the life of Columbanus is of a set of events that you could read over and over and over again that become to an extent timeless, just as the way they would for a monk reading the Bible. And that is sort of what the monks are trying to do. They're trying to create this timeless sense to get out of the human world with all of its imperfections and get back to the best of all possible worlds, which to them, of course, would be heaven. Thank you very much.